So 2020 just began and we're already at our very first Mercury retrograde of the year. And even though this Mercury retrograde is in Pisces, I really don't think this Mercury retrograde is going to be that bad, so you don't have too much to worry about. But it is a Mercury retrograde, so there is a lot to go over, and in this video I'm going to be going over the specific dates of when Mercury is going to retrograde, station direct, go through its shadow phase. I'm going to let you know what aspects Mercury is going to be making during this whole time. And I'm also going to go over what this Mercury retrograde is going to entail, what it might bring about in your life in many different ways. I'm also going to show you guys how you can see how this is going to affect you by seeing where Mercury is going to retrograde in your chart. If you've never seen me before, my name is Cameron Wyatt, I'm a professional astrologer, and I really like talking about these Mercury retrogrades because there can oftentimes be so much fear, so much anxiety around Mercury retrogrades. They're such a buzzword and people can just be freaking out about it, and then I want to give you guys some more information to kind of help you kind of guide yourself through this Mercury retrograde and see how you can use it to your best advantage. Or in other words, how you can kind of get around Mercury really messing up your whole day. So in case you've never actually heard of a Mercury retrograde before, and this is the first time you've ever heard of it, the Mercury retrograde is when Mercury appears to be moving backwards in the night sky. Mercury, of course, actually doesn't move backwards, but from our position here on Earth, it just looks like it does. Mercury is actually just making its orbit around the sun and starting to make its way in between the sun and the Earth. I'm sure most of you already know all the astronomy of it, however, now with Mercury retrogrades, there's three things that you also need to remember. Mercury retrogrades are a time of revisiting, rethinking, and reviewing. So while you might have ideas that kind of come to you that you might want to pursue, or things that you think you might or might not should say, the Mercury retrograde time is a time to rethink everything and to maybe go over everything and make sure you cross your T's and dot your I's. And hey, look, you gotta do what you gotta do even if Mercury is retrograde, so don't be afraid if, a lot of people say that you shouldn't buy a house or sign big contracts. And if you can avoid those things, great. However, you don't have to worry too much about it. Don't be too afraid of the Mercury retrograde. The other thing you've gotta know is Mercury retrogrades 3 times a year, so it does happen quite frequently. Now, the planet Mercury in astrology is all about our ideas, our thoughts, our sense of communication, and how we vocalize those things. Mercury rules over things like emails and texts and messages because it rules things like communication. So oftentimes during Mercury retrogrades, you're going to hear stories about people's, having miscommunications, certain words not being said to one another. This is also why you hear a lot of people saying, oh, X texted me during Mercury retrograde, because oftentimes it can have us going over what we should have said or what we didn't say. And because Mercury does rule over things like communication and talking, things can get kind of messy. And this specific Mercury retrograde might be a little messy simply because it's happening in the sign of Pisces. Now, Mercury doesn't really like to be in the sign of Pisces. It doesn't do its job very well there. Where Mercury likes Virgo and Gemini, where it can be acute, it can be detailed, and be able to express things in a very simplistic and clear way, Pisces is a water sign and can kind of dilute things, and it can make things a little bit hard to understand. And so Mercury in Pisces doesn't like to necessarily communicate with words and detail, but with images and expression. Not that if you have a Mercury in Pisces that it's a bad thing at all, but Mercury can definitely struggle with its duties in that sign. Now, we actually did have another Mercury retrograde in Pisces last year around this time in February and March. And so what might help you better have clarity on what this Mercury retrograde is going to do for you, you can think back to what was going on around February and March in terms of communication, maybe things of confusion, and that might help you better understand what you might be experiencing during this Mercury retrograde. So let's go ahead and get into all the details. So before Mercury even retrogrades, Mercury enters its pre-shadow period on February 2nd of 2020. Now, this is when Mercury is this is the area of the sky that Mercury is going to be stationing direct at, and this is at the point where Mercury will go over this whole space of the sky. So technically Mercury retrograde doesn't start until it retrogrades, but where Mercury travels during its shadow phase can kind of tell you and give you a little bit of insight as to what is going to occur during Mercury's retrograde. So from February 2nd to February 17th, this might be a really good time to really, be aware of what's kind of going on, what's being said, or what things kind of get brought to you, because these things will be coming up here in a few weeks. But Mercury enters shadow on February 2nd, and its shadow starts at 28 degrees Aquarius. Fortunately, there's no major aspects happening to Mercury during this retrograde, so this is going to be relatively not as harsh or not as, overwhelming as Mercury retrogrades can be. Mercury having its shadow phase begin beginning in Aquarius also gives us a little bit of hope, because while Mercury retrogrades in Pisces in its sign of detriment, it will eventually come back to Aquarius and station direct. The sign of Aquarius is ruled by Saturn, so Saturn things rule like structure and solid communication, group projects, networking. Aquarius is really about thinking outside the box. And as Mercury enters its shadow phase in Aquarius, I think that this is going to give us some insight as to what tools or what ideas that we need to create to help us better understand and better get over this Mercury retrograde. Then as we move forward on February 3rd, the next day Mercury moves into Pisces. Now there is going to be a big distinction here, because now Mercury is in shadow. This is where we're going to need to start paying attention to what's going on, what we're talking about, what we're thinking about. But as Mercury was in Aquarius, our ideas could be fortified through logical reason, through communicating with other people and sharing the same ideas with bigger groups of people and having our ideas more aligned with that. But as Mercury goes from Aquarius to Pisces, communication goes from being clear into being more image focused. But as Mercury moves from Aquarius to Pisces, this is where our sense of communication goes from these clear, logical, expressive thoughts to where in Pisces, Mercury can kind of struggle with interpreting or expressing its ideas because the words aren't necessarily coming out the right way. And Mercury can better express itself through imagery or through feeling or through its environment. And so from when Mercury enters Pisces, this is probably where you're really going to start to see things shake up. This is where the confusion's going to lay in, because Pisces is very an elusive sign. It's very watery. It's very mutable. So it's always about mixing and blending things. And when you have this planet Mercury all about our ideas and our thoughts kind of going through this liquid emotional blender, things might not necessarily be clear all the time. So while Mercury is going through Pisces through its shadow phase, this is where you're probably going to start seeing more ideas come up in your head that are maybe more clear in a pictured idea rather than in a thought or a word idea. But then we move forward to February 17th, where Mercury actually stations retrograde at 12 degrees Pisces. Now, it's still not making too many aspects here. However, it will be 5 degrees away from Neptune. And if you remember from last year, when Mercury stationed direct on Neptune, this is when the Mueller report came out. And if you guys remember, no one really knew what the Mueller report really had, and it didn't really say to anything. It didn't clear up anything. It just caused more confusion. And I thought that was a really good example of what Mercury, stationing direct on Neptune would look like. Things moving forward, but nothing was clear. Now, as Mercury comes up to that, comes pretty close to that conjunction with Neptune and stations retrograde, things aren't going to be as foggy. But before they do, Mercury's going to retrograde, and we're going to go over things again. And as Mercury retrogrades throughout the next few weeks, I think that this is really going to be focused on our ideas and how we can really put words to our images in our head. What are we wanting to create? What do we see? What do we want to express? And how do we find the right words to do that? How do we find the right images to express that? A big thing to do too is look at where Pisces is in your chart and what house it rules. Wherever Pisces is, that's where Mercury is going to be retrograding in your chart, and themes of that house might be brought to life. So if you have Pisces ruling your second house, this Mercury retrograde might be a mismanagement of some money. Or if you have Pisces ruling your 11th house, this might be a miscommunication within friendships. So make sure you guys look at that if you haven't already. However, then we get to February 25th, where Mercury makes its interior conjunction to the Sun. This is happening at 6 degrees Pisces, and it will be sextiling Mars pretty closely. When Mercury comes in and makes that interior conjunction to the Sun, this is when the ideas, the miscommunications, all of the thoughts and everything that might have been aloof, this is when things kind of become clear. This is when the storyline continues. This is when there is a sense of clarity. Mercury in Pisces is very unsure, and as Mercury retrogrades and gets closer to the Sun, that unsureness increases. However, when it conjoins the Sun, there is almost a light bulb in our heads where we go, I now see, I now get it, or that message or that communication finally gets to the other side. And as it is sextiling Mars, I think that this is going to be constructive with our sense of where we need to go, where we need to be pursuing, what energy we need to be focused on. And this might help us get the right mindset to pursue the projects that we're going to be so ambitiously focused on during February and March. But then we move forward and Mercury retrogresses back into Aquarius on March 4th of 2020. Now, like I said in the beginning, Aquarius is really wanting us to find constructive, innovative ways ways to really create not only solutions, but the results that we're looking for. Aquarius is all about doing things in a different way or doing things outside the box. And as Mercury retrogresses back into Aquarius, this is really going to help us kind of get a framework for our ideas and our projects or what exactly we want to communicate or express or whatever this Mercury retrograde brought to you. And as Mercury goes back into Aquarius, this is going to be supportive of all of these things and help us get a clear idea, because Pisces, of course, really confusing. When you get back to Aquarius, everything checks out. And then we get to March 9th. Now, we're gonna actually talk about this for a second, because I thought this is the most important part of the Mercury retrograde, is when Mercury stations direct. It's what everyone's always excited for, but this one is different. It's going to be at 28 degrees of Aquarius, where it went shadow. However, we're also going to be having the Sun conjoin Neptune on this day, and we're going to have the full moon in Virgo. Now, that's a lot of planetary energy going on in one day. The full moon in Virgo is giving us light into what specific things or words or ideas that we want to say. Virgo is all about organizing. It's all about filing things away, being detailed. And as the Sun conjoins Neptune, this might give us a very illusionary, very mystic vibe about what we're doing and the way that we're kind of operating. And so as Mercury does station direct in Aquarius, I think our mindset's going to be there. It's going to be where we need it to be, and we might have to think outside the box and be very creative of how we go about these situations. Of course, in a very Saturn way, so serious and disciplined. But as Mercury does station direct while the Sun is on Neptune and we have this full moon in Virgo, I think there is some excitement as to what our ideas are going to create. And of course, by this time, no one's going to really care about Mercury, but Mercury will move out of its shadow phase on March 30th, so by the time we get into April, this whole mess will be cleared up. And again, make sure you look at where Mercury is going to be retrograding in your chart, because that's going to give you a lot more insight and clues as to what this Mercury retrograde is going to bring you. I think this Mercury retrograde is going to be quite frustrating and maybe difficult, because Mercury doesn't work too well in Pisces. However, it's not going to be nearly as crazy or difficult as it was last year. I think this year is going to kind of be like a revisit to these old things, and now we have more experience, we have better ideas, we have better solutions, we've learned more things, and I think that we can handle this Mercury retrograde with a lot more ease by kind of going into our tool bag and being like, hey, how can I readdress this situation that can be confusing with some clarity, with some logical reasoning, all those Aquarius ideas. And then of course we won't have the next Mercury retrograde until this summer, so you guys are off the hook for the rest of the spring. Let me know where Mercury is going to be affecting you in your chart and what you think it's going to bring for you in the comments below. I'd love to see your guys' thoughts and ideas, and maybe when Mercury comes back and stations direct, you guys can come back and let me know how things kind of turned out. Thank you guys so much for being here. Make sure to subscribe if you like this video. I do weekly horoscopes as well as monthly horoscopes and a lot more astrological content. And I'll be seeing you next Mercury retrograde.